to give your elder relative the sense that it's the end of the road. I mean,
Right.
this could give them the sense that they're tempting fate, right?
Do you know what I think is really important here is that people realize that these kinds of things can really happen to anybody. And more important than anything is the ability to talk about them, to open up the lines of communication, to say it's okay to talk about this kind of stuff, because what we're talking about is really planning. Putting mechanisms in place in advance so that if the event that, again, that we all hope doesn't happen, if it does, at least we've planned for it, at least we have advance directives that have been signed, that your children can make medical and financial decisions for you when you become, if and when you become incapacitated, because the alternative is going to be far worse, and your family is not only going to be dealing with the loss of a relative in the sense that they're starting to decline in health, but also having to deal with complex financial issues for another individual without the legal means to do so.
And Sarah, if my parents or my siblings don't want to start talking about this, and I'm telling them, listen, I talked to some experts. They say, we got to do this, and they don't want to. Where do I go? Do I go to you?
Well, certainly if you were an employee who was involved with Partnership for Elder Care, yes, but there are geriatric care managers who can help you with that kind of situation. And also sometimes you just have to be very, very forceful with family members. This is something we've got to get done. If you can't be involved, then I have to do it on my own. Family relationships are not going to change under crisis. They're just going to be exacerbated. So it's better to do it before there's a crisis, even if not everyone agrees.
Do you find that more people are doing it? More people are feeling free to do it?
What I find is that more people today are educated about the issues. They're reading the newspapers and magazines and watching shows such as this, and they're more aware of the issues. I think the toughest nut is getting people to act on these issues for the same reason that we've all talked about, which is nobody really wants to confront their own mortality. Nobody wants to believe that they're going to be the one who is going to suffer a debilitating disease, a catastrophic illness, require home care, ultimately go into an adult home, etc.
All right. Okay. Thank you both. We focus next on senior care in the home. Right now, only about 5% of people over the age of 65 are in a nursing home, and only 20% of those over 85 are in a long-term care facility. Many families put great value on keeping their older relatives in their own home or bringing them to live with family members. Margie's mom, Teresa, lives in an apartment attached to her daughter's home. This is a story of how that arrangement works for both of them.
I think that decision to have Mom live with us came way before any of her illness even began. In 1987, she was living, taking care of my grandmother. My grandmother passed away, and we always knew that at that point she would really probably not be able to live on her own. She never really wanted to be alone. She didn't drive. She always relied on me for shopping and doctor appointments and these kinds of things. So we knew that we would be building an addition onto the house, this house that we were living in, and to accommodate her.
Well, I was getting a little feeble, and so I was alone in my house. My mother had died. She was living with me. And so I sold my house, and I came here.
She ran a tight ship. She really did. She ran a very organized household. Somewhat regimented because she had 5 children and she had a lot to do, and she was handicapped. She had horrible scoliosis and arthritis, later on osteoporosis also. She had a tremor in her hands. She had borderline, or possibly not even borderline, narcolepsy.
I remember one doctor.
When she was in her early 70s and she came to live here, a short time later, she fell actually down these stairs halfway down. It was a really terrible experience, but she was just very badly banged up at that point. She had broken her shoulder, but mostly just bumps and bruises. And that was probably our first exposure to her really being disabled. Then 6 weeks later, she broke her hip and she collapsed. And actually, she really never fully recovered from that, because then she had to rely on a walker, which meant, you know, picture it, you're using a walker. It's a little bit difficult to get a meal together for yourself when you can't stand without the assistance of a walker. How are you going to cook at the stove? It was apparent that she needed some kind of help, and me staying home with her full time was not a possibility. This was her home. This was where she wanted to be. This is where we wanted her to be, and we were going to do everything possible for her to remain home unless the situation were so dire that it just absolutely was not possible. There have been times when she's been in an institution for months, actually. It's almost worse having a person in an institution because you're constantly in there. When my mom was in institutions, be it hospitals, nursing home, over the past 1.5 to 2 years, to tell you the truth, honestly, I don't think 5 days in that whole period, and she had to be in as much as she was out, did she not get a visitor. Either myself or some family member was there every day. But on the whole, she couldn't wait to get home each time because it was not like being home. And the simplest thing, like asking to be taken to the bathroom, you know, if it's the weekend and you have the weekend staff, you might be sitting there waiting 40 minutes until someone has a moment to take you to the bathroom. And it's a pretty basic consideration. So, and as my mother likes to describe the nursing homes, it's one size fits all. That's what she says. There's no room for any individual attention. You eat when they say it's time to eat. You sleep when they say it's time to sleep. My mother was just not used to this kind of living, and I don't know that anybody really would be.
Some of those poor people I would see the nursing home, you know, they'd be out of it.
Each time she came home, we knew that she needed more and more care at home. It was to a point where I was afraid to go to work and to leave her at all. So we knew that, you know, we were coming to a point where we needed to do something. It was in the fall of 2001 that the woman at the Office of the Aging actually sent me some information on Medicaid, and she said that Mom may be eligible for Medicaid, and you might get a lot more covered under Medicaid. So we consulted with an elder law attorney who also led us to a woman who actually comes out to the house and will do a private evaluation as to whether or not this woman would be entitled to services under Medicaid and what services she would be likely be entitled to. So they determined that she needed 24-hour care 7 days a week. Mary is my mom's aide. And she's a quiet lady. She's from Ghana. She tries, I think, to be kind of non-intrusive in our lives, but we don't mind having Mary around at all. We love Mary.
Oh, she's wonderful. She follows me around. I walk with the walker. She watches me. She's the best sponge bather you ever knew.
Medicaid covers the cost of the home health aide in full. Actually, no, I shouldn't say in full. We have a small spend down that we have to pay. In addition to that, she has a nurse who comes from the visiting nurse service to check on her wounds. They will also check her vitals. And just generally speaking, keep an eye on her, keep a professional eye on her to be alert to any symptoms that may be a signal of something else going on. And that alone is a tremendous help to me. It takes a load off my mind, because that responsibility, I know that a professional is coming in here and checking her, so I don't have to be afraid that I might miss something. You know, so that's a tremendous relief. We are extremely lucky, both my mother and I, that this has worked out so well. And it wasn't an easy road. I won't pretend that it was. It was difficult to get the services that we needed, but the only thing that matters is in the end, we got them. And she's here with us where she wants to be, and she's better cared for than she has ever been, without a doubt. And she's happier than she ever would be anywhere else. I know that for sure, and that gives me a certain peace of mind. You know, nothing's perfect, and there were rough spots, but that's part of life, and that's just the way it goes. Like I said, I think the end result is more important than the process. As long as you got it to take you where you need it to be, that's what's important.
Carol Levine directs the Families and Healthcare Project at the United Hospital Fund. Carol is more than a theoretician. She's also a longtime caregiver herself and editor of Always on Call, When Illness Turns Families into Caregivers. Carol, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now who have you been taking care of?
I've been taking care of my husband, who was injured in an automobile accident nearly 13 years ago. And then my mother, who died in June, had been ill for a year, and that was long-distance caregiving. And both of, my husband is at home, and my mother died at home. So I know what it's like, and I also hear from many other people who we speak with at the fund.
Now, Margie and her mother are obviously in a very good place. They have
Oh,
I'm
they
an
are
ideal
in such a
situation,
good
don't they?
place.
Aren't they? But you could hear this the concern, particularly Margie talking about how much she depends on Mary, the
Yes,
healthcare worker.
right.
What happens if Mary gets sick or somehow has to leave? What kind of stress is she facing at that point?
Well, having home care is both a blessing and a problem because you're bringing in another person into your intimate family space. Now, one of the advantages in this situation is that there's separate space, which isn't always the case. And it brings a whole medicalization, as you saw with with Teresa, that can interrupt the kind of ordinary way one goes about living one's family life. And you know, the home care worker has a life too.
Sure.
She needs time off, or he. In my case, I have male caregivers, and so there's a sense of integrating this person into your family, but at the same time, they're not your family.
And becoming greatly dependent on them.
And
Something similar happened in my
totally
own
dependent,
family.
yeah.
The health worker had a tragedy in her family, and so it changed
That's
everything.
right. And when you're, now the situation there is an agency behind there's Medicaid, which is very unusual, and I think also. But if you're doing it independently, which many, many people do, you don't have that backup. And you don't have the backup of the nurse coming in all the time. So this is the best it can be.
Right, yeah.
And I think, I mean, I'm really impressed with the daughter's ability to make it happen.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
Now, what other kinds of stresses does a caregiver experience?
The caregiver who watches any elder person or person they love deteriorate, that's a psychological stress. There's also a great financial stress. In this case, it did not seem to be as big a deal, but it certainly is for many, many people. There's a trying to balance your work, your family, and the other parts of your family. And dealing with the healthcare system can be a very big stressor itself. Margie alluded to that when talking about being in a hospital or an institution. Dealing with the professional side of things is something that we at the United Hospital Fund are trying to improve, but that's an unrecognized stress, I think.
Now, what's out there? What can you do to alleviate that stress?
Well, you can try to get some time for yourself, and that's hard to do. I'm the last person to recommend this since I don't do very well at it myself, but it is extremely important. And it's extremely important to see yourself as not just the loving daughter, the loving son, the wife, but as an independent person with your own interests, your own life, in whether it's your job or your hobbies or whatever it is, not to let those things get overwhelmed by the caregiving role. And so many people just cave in under the overwhelming responsibilities of caregiving.
What if somebody does cave in, or what if somebody tries to be a caregiver to their parent or older relative and just comes to the conclusion that they can't do it, or they just won't do it? Does that make them a bad person?
Oh no, that is not a bad person. That is a realistic person. Now, there are different ways of going about expressing that, but certainly I think one of the things to do is to recognize that you cannot do it all. No family member can do it all, and you need to get help, whether it's from other family members or outside services, whatever it takes, because often people give up or feel they can't handle it because they're so overwhelmed by the enormity of it, rather than saying, I can do this, but somebody else has to do this. And you've got to be able to be, firm about that, be assertive about that.
Right.
Hard to do.
Right, very hard to do. Carol, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick.
You can find more information on our website at 13.org. Here are some of the places where you can start with a call.
Here are some of the places where you can find help with elder care issues. Friends and relatives of the institutionalized aged. information and support on issues surrounding long-term care, as well as an indispensable guide to elder care in New York.